Good evening and welcome to Iowa News and Views. My name's Joe Balcom. Thanks for being with us tonight. We have a terrific program. We're going to be talking about some of the issues facing the gay and lesbian community in Iowa as a result of Governor Vilsack's recent signing of Executive Order number 7. We're going to talk about some of those issues, so we hope you stay with us. Iowa News and Views is a public affairs program brought to you by all volunteer crew working here in Iowa City. We hope that you like the show. It's on every week. Today's November 1st. Tomorrow, Iowans are going to go to the polls and elect a whole bunch of new city leaders, and in a couple state legislative districts in Ames and Cedar Rapids, we also have legislative races. We hope that those, by the time you see this show, you're happy with the results of those elections and you've participated. Our guest this evening is Randall Palmer. Randy has been involved in a lot of different activities. He's currently the chair of the Gay and Lesbian Caucus of the Iowa Democratic Party here in Iowa. We're pleased to have you with us tonight.
Thank you.
Rand. He's also been involved in the Christian Church, Disciples of Christ, working on gay and lesbian activism there. He was formerly the president of Quad Cities Affirming Diversity over in the Quad Cities, also the director of the AIDS Project in the Quad Cities, and he's been involved in the Iowa Human Rights Coalition. He's with us tonight to visit about this recent executive order signed by Governor Vilsack that essentially provides protection for state employees and employees of Regents institutions in employment based on gender orientation and gender identity. And so those are the topics this evening. What's essentially happened when the governor, what protections are included in that executive order that the governor recently signed, Randy?
Well, the executive order covers a number of groups based on race, ethnicity, gender, but probably the new ground that was explored in this order was to extend for the first time any statewide protection against discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity.
So it added to essentially where we protected for race, ethnicity, age, creed, said that folks that were gay and lesbian and transgender and bisexual would now have protection under the law. So basically, if you're doing your job, no problem.
Right. If you work for a state agency in the executive branch and you happen to be a gay or lesbian person or a transgendered person, the order just simply says, we're going to let you do your job and perform your job based on your merits, not based on your sexual orientation or your gender identity.
To maybe define some of the terms, what is sexual orientation?
Sexual orientation has been defined in several court cases to mean heterosexuality, homosexuality, or bisexuality. So in that regard, if an employee has a heterosexual or has a homosexual supervisor, and the homosexual supervisor decides that he's going to fire the person because he or she is heterosexual, that person's protected under this order too.
Great. So another term that's been a new term, I think, to people is the whole question of gender identity and what that entails, what that means.
The term gender identity is probably less defined by statute or by judicial decisions, but there is a body of law that's emerging that defines gender identity, and it's typically the group of people that we know as transgendered persons.
So in Iowa, the governor's, maybe backing up a little bit, the governor's taken this lead role in trying to make our state more accepting in a way. I mean, he's basically only has really control over what's going on in state government, and thus this executive order. But could you talk a little bit about what you think this means, the governor signing this executive order?
Well, Governor Vilsack is very dedicated to eliminating discrimination. He's made that very clear. And at a breakfast meeting that I attended a few weeks ago, the Lieutenant Governor talked about this executive order, and she said that by issuing it, we've not only prohibited discrimination in executive branch agencies, but we've set a standard not only for the executive branch agencies, but for the legislature and for private employers. So I think this says that as the executive leadership of our state, we're going to demonstrate to others what we believe the non-discrimination standards should be in Iowa.
Now, we know in Iowa there's been cases where people have been discriminated, gay and lesbian persons been discriminated based on housing. There was a case in Davenport in employment. How do you think this will affect other employers and other folks in Iowa with this executive order?
Well, I think it will show to them that that the state believes that it is important that we determine who's going to work based upon their ability to do their work and not on other factors that have nothing at all to do with qualifications. So I think we'll see a few more employers who decide that they're going to adopt a policy prohibiting discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation.
Do you have any sense how big a problem this is for people?
Well, it's difficult to gauge because, first of all, if you call up most civil rights commissions, either at the state level, the Iowa Civil Rights Commission, or a municipal civil rights commission, with the exception of 3 cities in Iowa, they'll tell you that they can't take your complaint because the city and the state do not have laws that prohibit discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation. So we really don't have a reporting system. The other problem that exists is that people are reluctant to come forward and to make it public that they believe they've been discriminated against on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity, because then that just leads to further discrimination and makes them public, makes it difficult to get a job. When I was in Davenport and the reports came out about the people who had been fired at the nursing home, we attempted to find out who these individuals were, and they were very reluctant to come forward and be identified because they didn't want the publicity associated with it.
We have the number of the Iowa Civil Rights Commission. Maybe we could throw that up now. They have an 800 number that if you do feel like you've been discriminated on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity, I encourage you to give them a call there and register that concern with them. I think this reporting issue is an important one to kind of get a sense of the depth of the problem.
Yes.
So you'll see that. We'll throw that up again at the end of the show if you didn't have a way to write that down at the immediate moment. So you mentioned 3 other cities that have these protections. That would be Iowa City, Cedar Rapids, and Ames.
That's right, yes.
What's been their experience in the short time those cities have?
I believe the number of complaints have been fairly minimal. And I think it's because employers understand that they need to comply with the ordinance, and they go and do it. It's not that big of a deal. But it does give a sense of job security, economic security to gay and lesbian people in those 3 cities, and in Iowa City, persons who are transgendered.
That's correct. This last election, which will be settled by the time people see this has been kind of a campaign issue by some folks that were opposed to the changes in the Cedar Rapids Civil Rights Commission. It will be interesting to see how those election races turn out as one issue among many in that city.
Well, what we've seen across the country, and I don't think Iowa's any different, is that this really is not an issue upon which candidates lose elections. Certainly Governor Vilsack made it very clear during his campaign that he was opposed to discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation, and he went on to win that election, obviously. So I think that it will be interesting to see what happens in Cedar Rapids, but I'm confident that the people who supported the ordinance up there will be reelected.
It seems likely that they will be. There's been quite a political reaction the last few weeks around the state to the governor's executive order. There are a number of issues that people wanted to talk about, and just looking at some of the coverage that's appeared, just quoting, some legislative Republicans this week accused the governor of overreaching, violating the public trust, damaging the institution of marriage, and attempting to establish a quota system for homosexuals and transsexuals. Some opponents of the governor's executive order raise the specter of cross-dressers invading other genders' restrooms. Let's start with that one. In state bathrooms, are men going to be coming in there dressed like women?
Well, this order doesn't protect the individual, the man who wakes up one morning and says, I'm going to dress as a woman and go to work today. That's not what the order protects. The order protects people who are transgendered, who believe that they have been born with the physical attributes of one gender, but they think they identify more with the other gender, and typically engage in dressing and behaving of the other gender over a period of time. They seek medical treatment and maybe eventually undergo sex reassignment surgery. So the order is not designed to protect people who just simply want to dress up as women and go into a restroom.
Senator King, Steve King from Curran, I hope I said that right, he has suggested this is going to create some sort of quota system for homosexuals and transsexuals. What's he talking about?
Well, actually, Senator King ought to read the order, because that's not what it says. There are affirmative action provisions in the order, but those only go to race and ethnicity. They do not deal with or address the sexual orientation or gender identity issues. Those are only the non-discrimination provisions. So there are no quota systems to begin with under affirmative action. And so this is not going to require the state to hire a certain number of gay or lesbian people or transgendered individuals.
Another complaint people had, Republican leaders mostly, was that this was done in secrecy and that they found out about it through some publication that said it was a good thing.
Well, I find it interesting that the first article that the Des Moines Register ran was headlined about the secrecy and not about the substance of the order. First of all, I would just respond by saying that Governor Vilsack made it very clear during his campaign that he was opposed to discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation. He also called this press conference at which the executive order was read, or at least the pertinent parts of it were read. And for whatever reason, the press didn't pick up on it. It is ludicrous to me to believe that there was any effort to do this in secrecy, because there's no way to enforce this order unless you advise every manager and supervisor in the executive branch of state government. And that's more than just a handful of people. That's a lot of people that have to be trained and advised as to what the employment policies of the state are going to be. So I think that allegation is just smoke and really avoids addressing the substance of the issue, which most people have not had a problem with.
Sure. We're about midway through the show. You're watching Iowa News and Views. We've got a website to learn about past shows and upcoming shows. Check it out. Feel free to visit it on the internet. Also, we have an email address, and we love to get email. In fact, we're gonna have some email on the show real soon. So you send it to us, and we'll read it to you. All right, we're looking for it. I'll go home immediately after the show and check my email, see if you've sent me something. Appreciate it. Our guest this evening is Randall Palmer. He is also, in addition to being the chairperson of the Gay and Lesbian Caucus of the Iowa Democratic Party and a member of the Central Committee, he also works for Mid-America Energy in Des Moines and has been involved in civil rights issues of concern to gay and lesbians in Iowa for some time, and we appreciate him being with us. We're talking about the executive order that Governor Vilsack signed back in September, providing protection and employment to under sexual orientation and gender identity, and that's what we've been talking about. And the reaction has been an interesting one. There's been a number of editorials written, the Des Moines Register and the Cedar Rapids Gazette, editorialized in support of the governor. There was recently a kind of a non-scientific poll done by the Cedar Rapids Gazette that showed about 87% of the people that responded, almost 600 people, in support of the governor's position on this. You noted earlier this issue isn't one that generally turns elections. What is the mood of Iowans about this issue, do you think?
Well, I think generally Iowans are people who have the attitude of live and let live, and I think that Iowans are generally very receptive to having gay and lesbian people in their workforce. And I think there's a realization on the part of the governor and a lot of people in leadership positions, and probably at the Des Moines Register and the Cedar Rapids Gazette, that if we're going to grow our workforce in Iowa, we need to have as many capable people as possible here to help expand our state economically. And the governor and lieutenant governor pointed out to me that on a recent trip to New York, where they visited with a number of ex-Iowans, issued an invitation to former Iowans to come to a reception. They were expecting to get about 150 people, and they ended up with 850 people, many of whom identified themselves as being gay or lesbian. And that one of the reasons that they left the state of Iowa is because they would have a more comfortable life as far as being gay or lesbian in New York, and would not have to worry about job discrimination and losing their job simply because of their sexual orientation. So I think this is a real economic issue. I think most Iowans recognize it as being such, and that it really doesn't make any difference whether the person who is sitting at the desk next to you, working on the assembly line next to you, is gay or lesbian, as long as he or she is able to do the job that they've been hired to do.
Mm-hmm. But going back to a little bit more on the reaction there, an additional thing was found out through the course of the reaction was that the legislative staff in the Senate and the House, I believe both, have sexual orientation protection written into their own hiring practices, and that apparently came as a surprise to the Republican leadership. They didn't realize that protection was actually in place.
I would assume that that policy was adopted when both houses were controlled by Democrats. So it will be interesting to see if the Republican-controlled General Assembly continues that policy. I hope they do, because I think there are a number of, and I know there are several staffers that work for the legislature who are concerned about what this does to them in the future.
I think it would be a huge mistake to make changes in that. I think we would potentially we might lose some employees that become concerned about it, that are hard-working folks in those caucus staffs.
Very possibly.
Yeah. A couple other states have made moves on this. Minnesota apparently has a civil rights law that defines sexual orientation and gender identity. In California, I believe, is the other. Are we going to see more states moving towards these civil rights?
I think so. Already about 13 states prohibit discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation. Minnesota, California on the basis of gender identity. And I think this is going to keep moving across the country, and eventually I think every state in the country will bar discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity.
So the governor's executive order just covers state employees and Regents Institution employees. The state code would have the potential to change our civil rights code to focus on gender identity and sexual orientation. Do you see, what's the future of that in the short run for making those changes, do you think?
I believe that there will be a serious effort made in the next session to amend the Iowa Civil Rights Code to include sexual orientation and gender identity. I'm not sure that as long as we have a General Assembly that tends to be controlled by fairly conservative legislators, that that bill will be voted out and sent to the governor. I think if that situation changes and we have a more moderate or progressive legislature, that we can expect to see a bill like that sent to the governor, and he's indicated, as he indicated in his campaign, he's going to sign that bill.
I didn't know when we talked about kind of the reaction. The state of Iowa Civil Rights Commission also passed a resolution recently, and I understand in support of the governor's executive order. What role can the Civil Rights Commission play in this regard, do you think?
Well, I think one of the roles that they can do is speak as experts in the area of discrimination, and they can talk about the effects of discrimination on individuals, the very personal effects of discrimination on individuals. They might be able to act as a clearinghouse for information about other states that have adopted laws prohibiting discrimination along these lines. They might gather statistics and that type of thing. But I think first and foremost, the fact that they've endorsed it, they support it, indicates that their willingness to take on a civil rights code that would include sexual orientation and gender identity.
Moving to maybe a bit more personal level here, Randy, in terms of you're an attorney, you work for a large corporation in Iowa, what kinds of things do you personally run into as a gay person in Iowa, not necessarily in your workplace, but you know, you're a professional person, or your friends, the people that you hang around with that you hear stories about? What kinds of things do you confront?
Well, first, I'm in Iowa because I was fired from a job in Kansas City because they decided they did not want a gay man working for them. So I've been in Iowa now almost 11 years, and that's the reason. What I encounter on a fairly day-to-day basis are people who live their life, for the most part, somewhat in secrecy, fearful of discussing personal relationships that they have with others, talking about what they do in the off hours, doing things alone with their, through their employer, if it's a company party or that type of thing, rather than taking the significant other. They go to the party alone, or they don't go at all. And so that's the type of thing that I encounter on a day-to-day basis. And then if you look at that in a more expansive way, what they're doing is they're living in fear of losing their job. And the thing that I hear most is, I don't want to lose my job. That's the economic security that they have, is the job. And so it really alters the way one lives his or her life. I've been fortunate in having been out of the closet almost since the time I came to Iowa. And I decided that I was going to live my life as an out gay man because I didn't want to put the energy into covering up my real identity. And not everyone has that ability. And I think one of the things that helps me is I've been an activist, I've been a spokesperson, and I can be a little intimidating at times. But not everyone can be that way. And so I think we need to have protections for people so that they don't have to live their life in secrecy.
That's good. Yeah, in terms of the whole question of lifestyle, most people wouldn't, I would be very concerned if I had to continually worry about whether I was going to lose my job or not based on what I did in my private life. I think that would be scary to a lot of folks.
Well, I can tell you from personal experience, once you quit worrying about whether or not you're going to lose your job, it certainly frees you up for a lot of things. And I think it allows you to be much more creative, much more comfortable about what you do, and allows you to move on to other things.
Great. As we wrap it up here, maybe we could see that Iowa Civil Rights Commission phone number again. We've been visiting with Randall Palmer. He's an activist here in our state working to create more civil rights for people of gay and lesbian and bisexual and transgender identity, and we appreciate that, his work, and good luck in the next session of the legislature. I look forward to working with you on these issues.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thanks for being with us.
All right.
You've been watching Iowa News and Views. It's time for us to sign off here. We appreciate you joining us. We appreciate the work of the crew, our financial contributors, and of course our sponsors around the state. Remember, this is just a TV program, and what's important is really what you're going to do in your community to make it a better place. Thanks for being with us this week. We'll see you again next time.